we have Mr. Brandon here today and Stacy for our, well, as much as we need to get the work done. I would entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Great, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we have two bits of business. The first thing is we had the conditional use request, and I can't remember, were you both here for the last meeting
I
about this?
was.
You were?
I was not.
Okay. Well, you had an opportunity to read it over.
I did.
Obviously, Mr. Baines is here today if we wanted to ask any more questions. I think, from what I recall, we wanted to know, how many spaces are we going to need? How many people would actually be living up there? How many parking spaces do we have available? That kind of thing was really what we wanted to know about. And I feel like I can see it in there. It sounds like, and Mr. Raines, do you want to come forward and just say who you are to the, and from what I'm reading, you've got a possibility of 4 people living up there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And, from eyeballing it, I could kind of see 4 spaces. Is there, am I correct in that assumption from what I can see?
You want to see?
If there would be 4 parking spaces available for those
First
people.
of all,
Okay.
our employees, they don't have a car. If some have a car, so we have a 1 car probably, we can park in the backside of our Blue Water building, because might people coming from California, probably couple people, or maybe from outside, but they don't have a car. Yeah. But if they have some 1 car, and we can park in the backside only for 1 car.
Okay, so you only have space for 1 car.
Yeah, no, we can put the 2 car, but I know if someone have a car, only 1 car we can park there. I know pretty sure no one have a car. Right now we have 1 employee, they have a car, and no have other car, yeah.
Okay.
I think if you look at the picture he provided, that's clearly
Yeah.
2 spaces.
It's 2 spaces.
And
yeah.
is it this box down here? I was confused because originally I was thinking parking was by the building, and then there's this blue highlight over here. And
Yeah.
That's not it. No, it's
Okay.
not the propane tank square.
okay,
highlight is just
That's propane
that's,
tank square.
that's want to just make sure
it.
I'm what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Thank you. And can we just, for the record, review what the on-street parking rules are for downtown Grand Marais? If somebody was to have a second parking, a car, even though right now they don't.
Our units, it's a unit count, not a.
Yeah.
So if we call
On-street
this,
parking anywhere in the downtown area, what is our rule
we
as far as
um,
overnight parking?
Well, we require off-street parking for some uses.
Mm-hmm.
So for this use, we would say we want 1 per unit, one off-street space per unit.
And as it looks to my eyes, it is 1 unit. I mean, it has 2 rooms in it, but we'd still count that as a single unit. Am I correct?
We would, and I think that probably is worth some more conversation in the future, but.
Yeah, but for now, that is what
For
the
now.
rules state.
And excuse me.
No, go.
When we were, when it was this vacation rental, we required 2 parking spots, correct?
We did not.
Okay.
We actually-
wanna click.
Did not used to require
Okay.
parking for less than 10 units, and that's just recently something that.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that we
it
changed.
didn't apply to,
Yeah.
but it doesn't apply currently for,
Well, it does
It
apply
does.
currently, but
Yeah.
it didn't apply when the.
when that, yeah,
first-
for,
the use was first
so this
up.
is a grandfathered in? like-
No, I mean,
For the vacation rental use, I think so, yes.
Okay.
For the housing
Oh.
of employees, that's different, and it's.
Right, okay.
Has to comply with this rule.
I got you, yes, okay.
I
He
just-
wouldn't have had to come for the conditional use permit to continue the vacation rental use.
And that's,
And
I
could
just want to
still
clarify, now we're having year-round housing that we're kind of in a way making more difficult than if you wanted overnight housing. That's how I see it, and I want to know if I'm interpreting that correctly.
Yeah, I think you're interpreting that correctly.
Okay.
But, I mean, but we have made them same, really. I mean, going forward?
I think so.
Yes, okay, good. Great. Well, do you have any questions, Brandon, at all?
I don't think it says specifically anywhere. Is this being added to the top of the building, or is this
Oh.
in the existing area?
It's in the existing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not adding anything. They're
Okay.
just-
So this is currently going to, this is already built.
Yep.
And it was there as a vacation rental,
Yeah.
and he just wants to use it as, okay, but there's
Okay.
nothing's being changed other than that.
That's right.
Okay, okay, that's good.
We are just making you jump through a hoop because you want to provide year-round housing for people
We-
Okay.
who work here. And we appreciate you making the effort.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Well,
Thank you
with
very
that, Commissioners, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve.
Okay.
I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. It'll go
Thanks so
to.
much.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
In front of the city council next week
Yep.
at Wednesday's meeting. You're welcome to attend or not.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah, thank
See
you.
you later. Yes, and now on to the next part of our agenda, which is kind of interesting. It kind of makes sense that we would extend our rules that we had already crafted to include the planned unit development standards. It absolutely makes sense to me that we would do that, and I would propose we do. I mean, unless you guys had some other ideas, but it seemed to
Well,
make sense.
I would appreciate if
Yeah.
they would walk us through what is here and what I'm reading.
So, what the heck is a planned unit development?
Right.
Should we start with that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
'cause
you
I
know,
did
I know not
read-
everybody watches these meetings, but sometimes it's helpful for the public to understand
Right.
what
Well,
a PUD is.
and it's good for us, and
Yeah.
yes, but you go.
So, we have zones where we list the uses and the dimensional requirements and other things, and that's how we organize our land use plan in the city. And a planned unit development is kind of a mix between its own zone and a type of use. So a person who wants to take a piece of property and divide it up in a way that doesn't strictly meet the zoning requirements, but can demonstrate in some other ways how it does, is something that planned unit development is for. So what they typically look like is you take a larger piece of property and maybe some of it's unsuitable for development, or maybe some of it is difficult to get utilities to or expensive to develop, and that part of the property is set aside as open space. And in exchange for giving up the development rights to that property, those rights are transferred to another area on the property where more density is allowed. So it's just transferring the permission for density to a smaller area. And it creates
Got
a
it.
much more efficient way to pay for the development. There's less
Mhm.
roads, less utilities, less space impacted, less stormwater created. But in exchange for that, there's a lot more density. So we have, as I think most cities do, the ability to apply for and have a planned unit development in Grand Marais in our ordinances.
Mhm.
And so far, no one has taken us up on that.
So, and that's what I want to go back to Skildum was it Vesta project?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I was wondering, that was a larger piece of land that he divided, but it did meet the zoning.
It
So it
did.
did, is that why that didn't fall under planned unit?
It was a subdivision that you could just make with, given our existing zoning rules, there was no need to go through the planned unit
Okay,
development
I
process.
just wanted to clarify.
And I think if you, just not his specific, but anything like that, a
Mhm.
developer might have a vision where they don't want it to be pockets of density and a lot of open space. They might actually want to have larger lots that
Mhm.
they're selling, and, you know, that's their right to develop it how they see fit and how they think the market will respond. I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen a PUD in Grand Marais, but I think the primary reason is because there really isn't anything to gain by it as a developer, unless there really was that specific piece of property where you had some difficult to get to spots, and it just hasn't really happened.
Yeah.
The 3 acre minimum is also definitely a stumbling block. There's been, since I've been here, a few conversations about smaller pieces where folks have talked about wanting to develop them. And recently, there's a couple on the table right now that people are talking to us about potentially wanting to develop, and they're not quite 3 acres. And that's not surprising when you think about the fact that a city block in the city of Grand Marais is typically 330 or 300 feet by 400 feet, and it's not 3 acres. It's more like 2.5, or just under 2.5, frankly.
Mhm.
So even if you were to acquire, say, an entire city block and wanted to develop it in this manner, you would have to get a variance from our 3 acre minimum to do that. So it's been a set of regulations in our ordinance that just didn't really have any useful purpose to anyone, and it hasn't been used.
Mhm.
Somebody's thinking about using it, and they want to develop using our existing type of standards. This is actually, their original idea wasn't a planned unit development. It was just to build to our new residential standards, and yet the piece of property is ideal for this type of use, and it just made us think about, well, wait a minute, why did we just change all of our residential rules and ignore this
Except this one,
piece
yeah.
as well? And so it's due a conversation at least, and potentially an ordinance amendment too.
Yeah. I thought in looking it over, it did make sense that we would have the same standards. I mean, that just, I think, makes sense, right? The size thing was where I was not as clear. I mean, you know, clearly it makes sense that we wouldn't want it to stay where it is. And I do think a 2 acre makes sense, but I didn't find anything else out there when I was sort of researching around that talked about that in an explicit way. But to my mind, that also did make sense. But what do you commissioners think of that?
Well, I did not do a whole lot of research on this.
Well, you
as
don't
far
have to
as-
pick these numbers yet.
No, no, I mean.
The
Yeah.
question is, do you want to open the conversation?
Yeah.
And then we will schedule
Okay.
a public hearing to talk about an ordinance amendment that has numbers in it. We can get input, and you can do research and think about which ones you like and hear from the public.
Yeah,
And
Okay.
all of it.
great.
Sure, I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it is. And in terms of looking at additional zones, I thought what did we call it? The CI district, up.
Yeah, we've now called it the Highway Mixed Use District.
Right.
That's one that comes to mind pretty quickly for me as a likely place somebody might want to do this.
Yeah.
One other thing about a planned unit development that makes it kind of distinct from other zoning things is that it allows a mix of uses. You don't have to just do residential or commercial. You're really doing, that's why they call it a planned unit development. You're really having an entire plan for a whole concept of a neighborhood that has a mix of different uses in it. And since we already allow that in that zone, it seems like a spot where we would consider
Yeah.
allowing this as well. There are also lots that meet this kind of size requirement that exist in that zone.
Yeah. So yeah, for considering, going forward and having a conversation, I'd love to see that
Yeah.
as part of that conversation, and yeah.
And have you looked at other small towns like us that have these kind of ordinances? Have they updated recently, or?
I haven't found one that's updated recently.
Okay.
This is really, it's related more to, I think, the amount of staff that a town has that they devote to planning than it is to anything else. Because this is somewhat technical stuff now, and little more complicated for a developer to go through. And so a small town that's doing a lot of planned unit developments probably has a planner.
Well, that's always, so are we talking city staff doing this research and work, or are we going back to HJKI or?
Well, I was thinking this would be simple.
Okay.
And that the only thing we really want to change is bring it in line with the work we already did with them. So I was
Okay.
imagining we would do it ourselves.
Because we did kind of touch on that subject with them, and wasn't, some of those community houses was, I thought was talked about then, but.
It gets to what I think is the next iteration of this conversation, which is a little more complicated, that Jason from the HRA has been talking to me about, which is common interest community plats. All of the new zoning that we created, really the only new residential use that we allow that's suitable for owner occupied without some sort of common interest community plat is row houses. If you were trying to do a multi-story condominium owner-occupied development, our residential zoning doesn't really speak to that. It doesn't say you can't do it, but it kind of implies that you can't do it because of the lot lines and setbacks and such. So it's a gray area that we'll probably need to explore a little more this year. And he's saying this to me because he's getting asked about it, and developers just want some clarity from us. And
Yeah,
Well, then I think we go for it.
yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so that's all you need then? Just
That's all I need. So what we'll do next is actually draft an ordinance. It'll have some changes to these requirements in it. And we'll schedule a public hearing for your next meeting where this ordinance will be heard. And we'll kind of get the word out to folks that we're talking about it and see if anybody's interested.
Great. You know, one thing that I'd brought up before, and we kind of talked about at the council meeting the other day, but I would like to look at those heights. Just talking about heights, we had that, you know, we have that come up often.
Yeah.
And it just seems like we should have a conversation, like at least, you know, us on planning and zoning now and people on the council now, you know, when we talk about it, like downtown is really obvious, we can see it, we can feel it, we know why we have our standards. But once we start to get further away, you know, we're not at the lake, there's no view shed here. So what is that there for? I mean,
Yeah.
and is it serving its purpose for us anymore or not? Because it seems like we do run up against that often, so.
I think that's a great way to think about that conversation too, as more of an understanding of what are we trying to accomplish with this rule, and do we think it's working, or is it not necessary to accomplish? Could we modify it to accomplish it better?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're planning on just putting together some information for you to look at that meeting. I'm
Okay.
still not sure what the best way to move forward on that is. And it might be that we want to do some more like workshop type exercises to help explore that idea rather than just sit in a meeting and talk about it with each other. And it reminds me a little bit of the setback conversation that we had when we were talking about
Yep.
residential use. Like, well, why does it need to be 25 feet? What is it meant to accomplish? What does 25 feet accomplish that? Should it be 30? Should it be 10? You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's really hard to sort that out. And I don't think we came up with a clear, everybody agrees this is for sure why we're trying to do this. We did have a good kind of exploration of the various reasons that it exists, and everybody can kind of use their own to decide. Height strikes me as a similar.
Yeah, for sure.
And you've definitely made clear policy statements about height in the past few years through variance processes and other conversations. So then part of the conversation for your next meeting will be, do those policy statements that you've made imply a need for a change in our regulations? Or is it still, are we still consistent?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose one of the, you know, thoughts that we were having was along those lines of just like, well, you know, we want people to build something and we want it to make sense and we need housing, but then, you know, they're gonna look at our rules and say like, well, there's that height and I have to be under that, and so there you go. And we have clearly said over and over again, yeah, that height, no, you're not, that's it. Like, that is real. But then we had these up on the hill where, you know, it wasn't as obvious as if they were right here. Then we could say like, oh yeah, it's obvious. But it wasn't. So yeah, I think it'd be great to explore that and see if we can make sure that that's fulfilling its purpose for us.
And another thing we talked about quite a while ago was infrastructure
Yeah.
and the lack of infrastructure that inhibits development of some city property. So, and I know that's more of a PUC issue, but we had kind of talked a while back about how can we work together to encourage it being easier for people to get hooked up to city sewer and water when they want to develop lots.
What we certainly said we were going to do was look at what those costs are and imagine that in comparison to the market, and is there still a gap? Is that the problem? Unfortunately, we haven't had anybody put any in for a while.
Well, I
So
think
it's-
there were 2 projects that got put on hold because of those costs.
Yes, exactly.
And so,
So we've got their numbers, what they thought it was going to be, but I was hoping we'd have some actual data of this got put in and it cost this for us to look at to help understand that.
it came up in a dinner conversation I was at the other night about, and then naming off different projects that had to dig up the streets and
Yeah.
hire a private contractor, and was that the best way, or is there a better way to encourage development? And I don't know, I'll bring it up.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that that's worth further exploration because we definitely would like people to do it. If we can find that place in the middle that works for them and us,
Yeah.
it's not cheap. For anybody.
Well, I had a meeting with someone who's doing a potential residential development today, and I'm expecting them to submit an application for your next meeting as well. So I think that'll be just like the perfect place to
Okay,
dip into that conversation.
Yeah.
good.
Great. All right. I guess with that, we are adjourned.